Hello, everyone, and welcome to the African American Men of Westchester Health and Education session. This session will focus on mental health and wellness and the implications for African Americans. I am Edwin Bowman, member of AAMW and a co-chair, along with member Hassan Bilal of our Health and Education Committee. We are pleased to introduce Mr. Terrance Nicholls, licensed mental health counselor, who functions as a psychological rehab therapist. We welcome Mr. Nicholls to our session today.
Thank you to the African American Men of Westchester for allowing me to come and discuss this topic that I'm really passionate about. And most people at some point in their lives can benefit from therapy. And that's really going to be one of the things I discuss here today is how you can determine whether or not you could benefit from therapy, and then how you can go about finding a therapist that could be helpful for you. So the first thing, how prevalent is mental illness? NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, suggests that 1 out of 5 people, adults in the United States of America, suffers from some mental health condition. They also found that 1 in 20 has a severe mental health condition. Additional studies show that children ages 6 to 17, it found that 1 in 6 has a mental health condition. And we know that the second leading cause of death in people ages 10 to 34 is suicide. We also know that 90% of the people who commit suicide have some sort of mental health condition. Out of all the people in the United States who have a mental health condition, only approximately 40% are actually receiving treatment. And in the African American community, the numbers are even less. It's more like 33% or 1/3. So what that suggests is that 70% of the African Americans who need therapy are not receiving it. And that's a huge problem. And that's something we want to tackle tonight. So some people ask, do I have to have a complete meltdown in order to seek therapy? And the answer to that is no. Some people will ask, well, should I go to a therapist for every challenge that I have in life? And the answer to that is no. But there are times when you are going through a rough patch in your life and you could use some additional support. And that's where a therapist can really be beneficial. So today, again, what we're going to discuss are how you can determine. I'm going to give you 12 signs that you can look for that might help you determine that you need to seek a therapist. And then something really practical is how you go about finding a therapist. Okay. So number 1 is that a person may be grieving the loss of someone or something. And loss can be devastating. It could be loss of a relationship, it could be loss of a job, loss of a pet, divorce. It could be multiple losses at the same time that hits a person all at once. And they can be debilitating, particularly when the loss involves losing a person. What tends to happen is not only do they experience the physical loss of losing that person, but they also experience the grief of losing all the dreams they had attached to the future with that person. So it's almost like they experience 2 losses at the same time. And that can be devastating. So a therapist can help come alongside someone who's going through that and help them work through it. We know that there are stages of grief. A person who loses someone in their life tends to experience denial initially, right? It might be very difficult for you to say or accept that this happened. I can't believe that this happened. And just wrapping your head around the idea that this person is no longer around may be very, very difficult. The second stage that we find that people tend to experience when they're going through grief is anger, right? It's anger that this person was taken from you in some way, or they're no longer going to be around. The third is bargaining. We might say, well, why did this person have to leave? Or why did this horrible thing have to happen to this person when there are worse people out there? And it can be hard to reconcile that. Or you might say, why did it happen to this person and why didn't it happen to me instead? And then the fourth stage is depression. And this can really be a particularly debilitating stage, because when the person is experiencing depression, they can even develop suicidal ideation. You might not feel like, what's the point of living anymore? And it can affect all areas of their lives. And lastly, the last step is acceptance. And this is where the person gets to the place where they're not happy about the loss of their loved one, but yet they get to the place where they realize that, there's nothing they can do to bring this person back. And the best thing they can do to heal is to accept it. And there's a saying that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering happens in our lives when we're not willing to accept those things that we cannot change, exhibit what we call distress tolerance in the field. The second thing that might be a sign that you could use the benefit from a therapist is maybe you experienced a traumatic event. Maybe it was neglect, maybe it was abuse, maybe it was trauma. Perhaps you have a chronic illness. Perhaps someone committed a crime or committed violence against you, and since then you've been experiencing PTSD symptoms. If you don't address those things, you could suffer for a really long time. It can affect your sleep. You can have heightened startle response. You can develop to the point where your anxiety gets so out of hand that you can't even leave the house. So working with a therapist, particularly one who is skilled in working with people with trauma, can help you bring relief so that you can go back to living your life in a way where you thrive and you're not being debilitated by the things, the events that happened in the past. You might feel overwhelmed. Number three, feeling overwhelmed all the time, just feeling like you have so much on your plate. You have so many tasks that you tend to take on, and you're feeling stressed lately. You can feel the stress. Maybe it's even exhibited in your vital signs, right? Where your blood pressure is up. And we know for a fact that stress can have negative impacts on our physical health. It can lead to high blood pressure, which could then lead to stroke and heart attack and things of that nature. So we know that stress also tends to weaken your immune system, making us more susceptible to getting sick. So it's really important for us, particularly when we are feeling overwhelmed in life, to not just sit in those feelings, but to go seek a therapist who can help us unpack our feelings and help us work through them so that we can manage our stress. They can help give you some stress management techniques that will help you in regaining control, creating a healthy balance between doing and resting in your life. One thing that people tend to find particularly beneficial is when a therapist helps them determine how to establish boundaries, how to communicate boundaries with other people. And people often find it eye-opening just to learn that there are three important things to remember about boundaries. Number one, boundaries are unique. Number two, boundaries are invisible. And number three, boundaries can change. So it's helping a person understand that, you have the right to say no. And no in itself is a complete sentence. You don't have to add anything else to it. Just say no and be okay with saying no. Don't feel guilty about saying no. The other thing that you want to remember is that boundaries are invisible. So what people do in error is they often assume that other people have the same boundaries they do. So that puts them in a place where they inadvertently overstep your boundaries because they think, you feel the same way about this that I do. And that is unfortunately an error. So a therapist can help you in determining the best way to communicate those boundaries to other people. The third thing is that boundaries change. So something that may have been acceptable to me 5 years ago may not be acceptable now. And sometimes, people have a hard time saying, I feel bad about breaking this pattern. I've done this X for so many years, and now I feel like, how can I go back to this person and tell them that this is no longer acceptable? And you have the right to do so. So a therapist can come alongside of the person and empower them to do those things. Some people, number four, if you find yourself abusing drugs, excessively eating food, engaging in sex, that could be problematic, right? People engage in using drugs and alcohol because they want to numb themselves to the feelings that they're experiencing. Some people turn to food, right, for comfort. We've heard that term, comfort food. Well, some people turn to food to help them resolve their issues. Other people turn to sex. And the idea here is that if I engage in sexual acts, then you know what? I will have that momentarily feeling of feeling love. The challenge with all three of these strategies is that they create other problems, number one, and two, they don't address the underlying issue. So a therapist can help you come alongside you and help you identify what the real issues are so you can address them and not turn to maladaptive coping strategies that are going to cause more problems in your life. The next thing you might find is that number 5 is that you display disproportionate amounts of rage, anger, or resentment. And I often like to emphasize that anger is a secondary emotion. And what I mean by that is anger is the thing that we often express to people, right? I'm feeling upset now. But below that, what's more important is the primary emotion. Why do we feel anger? We feel anger because we're feeling unloved. Maybe we feel guilt. Maybe there's resentment. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I feel hurt. Maybe I feel unloved. So all of those things, it's important, and a therapist can help you unpack those ideas to find out what's fueling your anger. Because if we just define it in the vague term of saying I'm angry, we really don't know how best to address it. So working with a therapist, they can help you identify those things and then help you come up with constructive ways on how you can communicate those feelings to other people, right? Because we want to be assertive. Oftentimes, you know what, the strategy that people tend to use with anger is they say, you know what, I'm just going to hold it in and not say anything at all so that I can avoid conflict. The challenge with that strategy is that then it builds inside of you to the point of explosion. And when you explode, you later say or do things that you later regret. So we don't want to do those things. So a therapist can help you determine assertive ways of communicating with others so that you can communicate effectively and not have to experience those feelings of anger because you feel hurt. Number 6 is you feel afraid to leave the house or fear of having a panic attack. Panic attacks are extremely unpleasant. In fact, the book that we use, the DSM-5, to diagnose people says that the person who's experiencing a panic attack may feel like they are having a heart attack or even like they are dying. It's that unpleasant. So this is not something you want to experience. The other thing we know about panic attacks is the number one cause of panic attacks is fear of having a panic attack. So this is when someone is out in the public and they think to themselves, oh my goodness, what if I have a panic attack? I'm going to be so humiliated. So what they do instead is they say, you know what? I'm not going to go out in public, right? Because I don't want to risk that. Or when they go out in public, right, they finally push themselves because they've been hibernating for so long. They go out in public, and then what happens is they start to ruminate on those thoughts that what if I have a panic attack? And they actually cause the panic attack, which again can be debilitating. So a therapist can help them understand the fight or flight system and help them incorporate and use techniques that can help them deactivate those feelings when they start to arise so they don't escalate to that uncomfortable panic attack. Number 7, you regularly experience anxious or intrusive thoughts. This is when someone chronically worries about things. You know, people who worry all the time. We call them worry warts, right? Those worries can be debilitating, you know, particularly if you find yourself consumed with them. You can't concentrate on anything else because you're worried about one particular thing, what could or could not happen in the future. And it is important, and a therapist can help you understand that the worrying comes from us, right? It comes from within. And it's really important to know that I am the source of my worrying, because when I identify it as such, then I realize there's some things that I can do to help counter it. Okay, so that's what a therapist can do. They can help you see that, you know what, you're the source of your worry, and then give you strategies to help you manage those feelings so you don't become overcome with it. The other thing is, I think that's really important, particularly with worry and anxiety, is understanding that not all worry or anxiety is bad, right? If I am anxious or worried about driving 120 miles per hour on the highway, that's actually a good thing, right? Because I say to myself, you know what? I don't want to do this because I risk injuring someone else or injuring myself or possibly getting a ticket, and therefore I abide by the speed limit. If that were the case, that worry was actually constructive. So we're talking about the worry that becomes debilitating, that keeps you back from accomplishing things in life and just being all consumed with your thoughts. A therapist can help you work through those. Number 8, you find yourself feeling hopeless, feeling like you have no motivation, feeling that your current situation is your permanent situation. And I tell people all the time, particularly those in their worst states, that you know what, the first part of treatment in order to gain any relief is you have to believe that your situation can change. And all the people that I've worked with who've attempted suicide or have been consumed with thoughts of suicide, they all suggest one thing. They think to themselves that my current situation will never change. And if you take your current situation or circumstances and you project them into eternity, that's going to rob you of all hope. You're going to think to yourself, what's the point? I don't want to live like this anymore. So a therapist can help come alongside you and get you to see things from a different perspective. And again, we don't want to stay stuck in those thoughts of hopelessness because they can often escalate to suicidal thoughts. Number 9, you don't feel like you've been functioning 100%, just feeling in general that you're just not yourself. You might notice some changes in your mood. You might notice that you find that it's difficult concentrating. You might find that your memory is off. You have difficulty recalling events, and all of this has impacted your productivity in a negative way. Well, a therapist can come alongside you and help you determine when these things happened, what may have contributed to it, all right, and then what things you can do to help address them. Okay, such as behavioral activation with reward. That's one thing that we do in particular. If people just aren't feeling themselves and they're not functioning, they're not doing things that they would normally do, we get them to do things in a purposeful way. And in doing that, it breaks them out of the cycle of just feeling stuck. Number 10, you don't have an unbiased, confidential person to talk to. Talking to a therapist is not like talking to a friend. People often say, I don't need to go to a therapist. I can just go to my buddy. Well, your friend is not skilled and trained to help you with a lot of the issues you may be experiencing. You know, some other things that we find is that people who confide in friends, they later realize that, you know what, my friend really can't handle this. I am giving them a lot of things and now they're not returning my calls. They're blocking me. They're not returning my text message. They're unfriending me. All these things because you know what? You've overwhelmed your friends. They are not equipped to deal with it. A therapist is. A therapist is equipped to help you carry your burdens and deal with it. Hold the pain with you while you're working through it. They keep the information that's discussed confidential, so you don't have to worry about things leaking out to other family members or other friends. They are unbiased, right? We don't have any particular objective other than providing you with help, right? We don't have any ulterior motives where a friend may have some ulterior motives. And you know what? We don't throw it in your face later. You know, sometimes we confide in a friend and they're there in the moment, and then we have a disagreement with that friend later on, and then all of a sudden they use those things that we shared with them against us in the future. Number 11, you just feel stuck, right? Therapy can help you with that. You might feel like, you know what, life is just unfulfilling, feel completely empty. You might feel stagnant, stuck, and like nothing is going anywhere in your life. And that may be in the areas of relationships. It may be in the areas of career. It may be in your living situation. And a therapist can help you by identifying, you know what are some goals that you actually have? What are some things that you want in your life? They can help you identify the things that are anxious or making you feel anxious that are hindering you from moving forward. And then lastly, they can come alongside of you as an accountability partner to help you accomplish those goals and overcome those feelings of fear that you might experience as you move towards your goals. Number 12, you don't ever relax because you're constantly putting pressure on yourself to be productive. We call this unrelenting standards, right? Where you're constantly on yourself to be productive at all times during the day. You might feel like time and efficiency are the most important things. You may tend to be a perfectionist. A therapist can help you prioritize what's really important in life and not make everything critical. A therapist can help you set realistic expectations so you don't set yourself up for disappointment. We know that perfectionists, a lot of times, they don't move towards things in their lives because they think to themselves, if I can't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to do it at all. We can encourage you to delegate and ask for help. If you're a person who feels like you just needs to constantly go, 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 you might feel like I have to do everything myself, particularly if you're a perfectionist, because you think to yourself, if I don't do it, it's not going to be done properly. Well, a therapist can help you come along and see the benefits of asking for help and delegating duties, and then give you strategies on how you can effectively do those things. And then realizing also, particularly for people who have these kind of unrelenting standards, that relaxation is important. Yes, productivity and doing things is important, but it is also equally important to occasionally just take time to recuperate and engage in what we call self-care. Number 13, you want to increase your self-awareness. A therapist can help you get to understand you, which, we think, well, I should inherently know who I am, but most people do not. So a therapist can come alongside you and do that and help you see patterns in your life. There are certain thinking patterns that might be causing you distress, like you're always a person who's skewed towards the negative thought. You might be relationship patterns. You find yourself in relationships with the same people with the same negative characteristics over and over again. Perhaps you have communication patterns that really don't behoove you, like you are sarcastic most of the time. And maybe there's self-limiting beliefs. Maybe you've been thinking about starting a business, but you know what? You never get started because you have all these self-limiting beliefs telling you that you're not worthy of doing it or that you can't do it. So a therapist can help you identify those things and help you break free from the things that are holding you back. Number 14, you need help navigating through a transition, right? There could be a new job, a new career, relocating. It could be that you're becoming a parent. It may be that your kids went off to school. Maybe your kids came back after they graduated from college. Maybe you're now the caretaker for your parents, right? All of these changes shake things up, and a therapist can help you adapt to these changes. So seeking therapy, if you find that your environment has changed and that has thrown you into a tailspin, talking to someone who's qualified can really help you overcome them. Number 15, you want some parenting support. We know one thing for sure, that parenting is extremely difficult. And you know what? Some people become self-conscious that, am I doing this parenting thing the right way? Some might notice some behaviors in their child and think to themselves, you know what, this doesn't seem right. Right. In those cases, seeking a therapist, maybe a child's therapist in that case, to kind of sit alongside of you, interact with your child to help you identify if, yeah, things are out of the ordinary, so that they can implement some interventions to help you and your child. Okay. The idea here is the therapist is going to also empower you to make important decisions that are going to benefit, again, both you and your child, so that your child grows up to be a thriving adult. And number 16, your emotional state is impacting your appetite or sleep. When people are in a bad place, they often neglect to eat, right? They might lose a significant amount of weight in a very short period of time, or conversely, they might gain a significant amount of weight in a very short period of time. And the reasons for that is because, well, they tend to eat a lot because they're trying to comfort themselves, which, as we talked about earlier, creates other problems, right? Or they might just be so consumed with whatever is bothering them that they don't eat at all, and it's affecting their weight. And your weight can drop to unhealthy levels, which can put you at risk for cardiovascular events. So we really want to be mindful if there are any changes in our appetite, when we notice them, to take a step back and say, you know what, what's going on with me? The same thing is true with sleep. Sleep is important, right? We know how we are when we don't get enough sleep, right? You can be on edge, not feeling yourself. You're just tired during the day all the time. Some people sleep excessively. We call that hypersomnia, where the idea for them is that they're trying to just sleep their problems away. And so they might sleep 14, 16 hours a day. The challenge with that is that, you know what, when you wake up, the issue is still waiting for you. You never address the problem. And not only that, if the thing that you're avoiding is something time sensitive, you just made matters worse because now you have less time to deal with it. Conversely, what people do, some people find it very difficult to sleep, right? Because they're ruminating, they're thinking about these thoughts over and over again that don't serve them well. And it's almost like a broken record that just will not stop playing. And in those cases, a therapist can come alongside them and help them for both appetite and sleep. Help them come up with a healthy nutrition strategy. They can help with the sleep hygiene and help them get back to getting the rest and a healthy appetite that they actually need in their lives. Number 17, you lose interest in activities you once enjoyed. The technical term for this is called anhedonia, which is the loss of interest in things that you once enjoyed. It's a major, major symptom of depression. And there's nothing wrong with occasionally losing interest in a hobby that you once enjoyed. But if you find that you're disconnecting from everything and you no longer get enjoyment in anything, something is really wrong and you want to address that. So, talking to a therapist about your feelings can be really important. And then through behavioral activation with reward, where they actually get you to be intentional about planning purposeful, pleasurable activities, can be helpful. Because what we find, particularly when people get depressed, is the reward center in their brain kind of goes dormant. And so, because that's happened, when you go and engage in something that you once enjoyed, it doesn't yield the same effect that it did. But we also find that if you stick with it and you continue to go and engage in those activities, despite not having that feeling that you used to get in the past, it wakes up that reward center, and then you start to gain the benefit again from engaging in those activities. So it takes time, but coming alongside of you, a therapist can help you reap those benefits. Number 18, your social life is suffering. And sometimes, people, it's due to social anxiety, fear of scrutiny from other people. Other times we just isolate because we feel like, I don't want to be a burden to other people, but isolation can be unhealthy, right? I like to say, when you stay in your house, you stay stuck in your head, and that's not a good thing, right? You just regurgitate these thoughts that are not healthy for you. And so getting out and socializing is really important. Alfred Adler, who's a psychologist, and I'm partial to a lot of his work, he says that whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, we all have the need to feel connected. So it is not a good thing to be disconnected from everyone for long periods of time. And I just want to highlight, there's a difference between isolation and solitude. All right. Solitude is, I need some time for myself, for self-care. There's nothing wrong with that. Isolation is you cut everyone off and everything off, and you kind of just stay in your house and stay in your head. The quality of relationships is important, though. So a therapist will help you form relationships, and it's really important to remember it's quality, not quantity, right? It's better to have two really close, supportive friends than to have 20 acquaintances who really don't know anything about you and really don't have your best interests at heart. So a therapist can help you in rekindling maybe old relationships that somehow went astray. A therapist can help you figure out how to create new relationships with new people, can teach you skills to enhance your communication skills, and help you discover all the things, the areas of your social life that have been suffering. And studies show that particularly people who have low self-esteem, guess what they tend to do? They tend to gravitate towards making friends with people who treat them poorly. So a therapist can help you see that and help you break free from those relationships that are not healthy for you. Number 19, you want to change the unhelpful thinking pattern. So there are some thoughts that we have, and we know that thoughts affect the way that we feel. In cognitive behavioral therapy, they call those cognitive distortions. And the idea here is that these are, as the title suggests, inaccurate ways of thinking that are negatively affecting how we feel. So, for instance, one might be overgeneralization, where I think to myself, just because something happened once, it will always happen that way. And if I do that, you know what? I might say, I'm not even going to try anymore because something turned out badly for me in the past. Or maybe it's this kind of black or white thinking where you think in extremes. It's either something is perfect or it's completely horrible, and you discount all the areas in between. Maybe it's mental filtering where there are some good things happening in your life or during the course of the day, but what you tend to do is just focus on the negative thing, one aspect, and focus on that solely and block out all the positive things. And you can see how that could affect you in a negative way. Another one was catastrophizing, where you're assuming the worst case scenario will happen. And you know what? Our body is going to be affected as if that is actually true, right? So we have minimization, where you minimize your own positive qualities. There's personalization, where you personalize and make everything your fault, things that you're not directly responsible for, you hold yourself accountable for, which is not fair to you. You might be mind reading and assuming that people are thinking things negatively about you. So a therapist can help you uncover these distortions and address them so that they no longer have that grip on your life. And number 20, maybe you just don't feel like you should. You're just not feeling yourself. And a therapist can kind of just help you, come alongside of you, help you re-strategize, and help you to accomplish some of the things that you want to accomplish in life. So those are the 20 signs. And of course, there are more. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that I see that come up most often. And if some of these have resonated with you, it's not enough to just say, oh, wow, I'm struggling with a lot of those things. Give yourself some relief. Go out and seek therapy from a qualified therapist who can help you. And so now I want to just transition to how you can go about finding a therapist. I think it's really important to know that seeking therapy is not something that doesn't mean that there's something necessarily horribly wrong with you, right? Seeking therapy is not a sign of weakness. In fact, I would argue it's a sign of strength because it takes a lot of courage to say and willingness to be vulnerable and say, I can't do it on my own and I need someone. So that's not weakness. That is actually strength. So therapy, seeking therapy is certainly not a weakness. The other thing I wanted to add is that the sooner you get help, the sooner you get the relief. Some of you watching may have been suffering for a couple days, some of you weeks, some of you months, maybe even some of you for many years. Get the relief. The sooner you get the help, the sooner you feel the relief. The other thing I'd like to say is that there's this ideal of crystallization. So particularly with depression, if you don't address your depression and you just let it go on for long periods of time, the longer it goes on or that episode lasts, the more resistant it becomes to interventions. So we want to go ahead and not wait a long time when we realize that these symptoms are present in our lives, but in fact, move on them and address them as soon as we can. So some ways you can find a therapist. There are some websites that I think are good sites. One is Psychology Today. So you can go to psychologytoday.com. There's also another one called Good Therapy. You can find out useful information from NAMI.org, NAMI.org. But for this segment, I really just want to focus on Psychology Today in that format. Again, you can explore other ideas, but this is also a good one. So if you go to the Psychology Today website, you can enter in your zip code and it will show you therapists in your area. And what type of therapists they'll show you are psychologists, mental health counselors, and social workers, all of which are qualified to help you. So the wonderful thing about it is you will get their name, of course. You will also see a picture of them. Some therapists will actually even have a very short video. So you can kind of get a feel for that person's personality. And that can be helpful. Some more information that you'll find is you'll usually get the location of the person's office. Maybe they have more than one location. Perhaps they're doing in-person and they're doing Zooms type sessions where you can just meet with them remotely online. All of that will be indicated there. There's often a bio, which will explain the person's training and experience in the field, which can be extremely helpful. There's information about whether they take insurance or not. And if you find a therapist that you think would be a good fit and they don't accept your insurance, don't give up, right? Because if you have insurance, you might be able to use what we call out-of-network benefits, where you pay for the sessions right after the session. But what happens is your insurance company reimburses you at the end of the month, and some reimburse up to 70%. So if you think you've located a great therapist and you notice that they don't accept your insurance, don't give up. You should still give them a call. But on most of the profiles of the therapists, they'll say which insurances they use. And so you can check if you have a particular carrier, you can just say, oh, okay, maybe I want to sort by therapists in my area that accept this insurance. You can do that. Some other things that will be listed there on the website are the diagnoses that they're familiar with or trained to work with. So maybe you're struggling with major depressive, maybe it's an eating disorder, maybe it's alcohol and substance abuse. it's really important to try to find someone who has the expertise in those areas. And also, you can also look at the symptoms that maybe they're experienced with. Some people really specialize in anger management or stress management. So you can do searches on those symptoms, and again, find someone who really would align well and be a good support for you. There's also information of the types of therapy that they use. So there are things like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy we're hearing about now. Some people like other types of therapy. So for in substance abuse, this motivational interviewing is something that is really used often. So if you know of a particular style of therapy that would be good for you, you can also search that way. And then, how they deliver therapy. Some people do only individual therapy, some people do couples therapy, some people do family therapy, some therapists do group therapy. So you have to decide which one would be most beneficial for you and then move towards that. And the wonderful thing is, again, all of these things are highlighted right on the therapist's profile. All right. So I hope you found that information helpful. And now, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those questions for you now. How many sessions does someone have to attend in order to feel better? That's a really good question. How many sessions does someone have to attend in order to feel better? Well, there are some studies that show, on average, people tend to report feeling better in 7 to 10 sessions. There's also was a study once that revealed that 88% of the people who attended therapy said after one session, they felt better. Now, not completely healed and cured of all their issues, but they just felt a lot better by just having that person there who could be that listening ear, who was skilled and trained, who could come alongside of them and help them. So in one session. But generally speaking, it doesn't take a long time. If you find, I mean, of course, if you have a serious mental illness, you might need long-term treatment, and there's nothing wrong with that. But most people can benefit from short-term treatment that is solution focused. And that means that the therapist, or you come into the therapy office, you talk about some issues that you're going through, and they help you unpack those issues. You guys come up with a strategy on how best to address those issues. And then you may have some homework that you have to do between, then and the next session. But the patient then, or the client then, starts to feel the changes in their lives and experience wonderful the results in their lives. What if the person tried therapy in the past and it did not work out? Well, if someone has tried therapy in the past and it hasn't worked out, I have to say you don't want to overgeneralize and say that I've tried it once back in 1998, didn't work, it'll never work. That's not true. I would also say that it's really important for you to tell yourself that you believe that it can help, right? Because if you tell yourself repeatedly, and I tell people this all the time, that this is not going to work, this is not going to help, you are going to prove yourself right, right? It will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So particularly if you've tried therapy and it hasn't worked in the past, you may want to look at some reasons why. Was it that it wasn't a good fit between you and the therapist? Did you feel like you weren't listened to? Were you realistic about the expectations? Did you give therapy enough time? This is not something that happens overnight. A lot of the issues that people are dealing with developed over years, and you're not going to resolve that in 1 or 2 or maybe even 10 sessions. So just being patient can be extremely helpful. And then the rapport. I mean, it's really important to have a good rapport with your therapist. If you feel like it's just not a good fit, chances are there won't be much progress in sessions. What can a person do if they find a therapist they like, but the therapist does not accept their insurance? Yeah, if you find a therapist and your therapist or the therapist that you find does not accept insurance, you should still call them and find if they accept out-of-network benefits. Again, you would be responsible for paying right after the session ended, but they will get a lot of that reimbursed for them at the end of the month. Now, there's not a set amount. Some, again, reimburse up to 70%. It depends on the insurance carrier and then even the plan within that carrier, right? Because different plans reimburse at different rates. There are deductibles and copays and things you have to consider. So really talking to the therapist and then talking to your carrier to understand what your financial responsibility will be is really going to be really important. What can someone do if they start therapy and the relationship is not a good fit? If you start therapy with a therapist and it turns out to not be a good fit, you have the right to say, you know what, this is not a good fit and terminate therapy. In fact, your therapist also has that responsibility. If they feel that they can't provide you with the help that you need, they have the responsibility of saying, you know what, I think I need to refer you to someone else. So it's okay. Sometimes the only way to find out if the therapist is a good fit or not is by going in and having some sessions. And then, if when you first start and you sign on with a therapist, you'll see in part of some of the paperwork what the termination process is. And oftentimes you just follow that process and then you move on to another therapist. But don't feel like you have to stay stuck with a therapist if you tried it and it just doesn't seem to be working out for whatever reason. What if someone finds a therapist who specializes in treating people with their diagnosis, but the therapist is of a different race? If you find a therapist and the therapist is of a different race, I would say accept the help. The wonderful thing about therapists is that they're trained to work with all different sorts of people, different religions, different cultures. So I would say seek the help and receive that help. And you might be surprised. Not all of my clients are African American, and I still have the ability to meet their needs. So don't let that stop you. If the person is not of the same race, don't let it stop you from seeking treatment, because again, the sooner you get the help, the sooner you feel the relief. The last thing I want to talk about is the law of diminishing intent. If during this discussion you thought to yourself, wow, there are a lot of these signs that I've been exhibiting and maybe for a really long time, and I've been struggling and just keeping this all to myself, I want to share with you something called the law of diminishing intent. And the law of diminishing intent suggests that the longer we wait to do something, the less likely we are to do it. So if you thought to yourself during this session that, you know what, I think I need to contact someone for help, don't delay, right? Because if you put it off for a few days, then a few days will become a few weeks, then it becomes a few months. And before you know it, you've been suffering for maybe another year unnecessarily. So if some of these things that I've discussed have resonated with you, start doing that search today for a therapist. Go to some of those online sites and start making calls. It's important to remember a lot of these therapists will offer you a free consultation over the phone. So if you're worried that, oh man, I'm going to have a serious financial expenditure, just from your first phone call, that's oftentimes not the case. And you'll see that indicated on the therapist profile when you go to Psychology Today. Most of them will say we offer a free initial consultation. So take advantage of that and don't let that hinder you. But the law of diminishing intent, the longer you wait to do something, the less likely you are to do it. So I thank you guys for tuning in and listening to this, again, topic that I'm really passionate about. I'm passionate about people getting help. And so I hope you found this helpful. Thank you to the African American men of Westchester for allowing me to speak on this platform. And it's truly been an honor. So I just want to say thank you.
Terrance, thank you very much. You have given us some very useful information today, some great information, and we appreciate it greatly. To our audience, I would like to say that you can find a list of therapists in Westchester County that can help with mental health issues. It is on our website at aamw.com. And once again, Terrance, I would like to thank you very much for sharing some very great information with us today. And we look forward to having sessions in the future where we can cover other topics that deal with mental health. Thank you again.